So, good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for showing up on a Sunday morning. And we're delighted to welcome all guests, whether they are IMF staff, members of their family, because I know that the Family Association has convened some of its members and is finding this event interesting, and all our guests on the occasion of these annual meetings. We have decided for the first time to do something slightly different, with very high-level participation on the other side of the table. But a bit unusual because it is not your normal double PhD, although not necessarily somebody who is writing massive books on macroeconomics with plenty of charts across the board and back and forth, but somebody who is taking a real interest in matters that are of interest to the IMF. Obviously, he needs very little introduction, but we're going to give Michael Lewis a huge, big round of applause for accepting our invitation. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you.
And if it works, we might do it again another time. So, we have a challenge, Michael, here. Your books include, I don't want to forget any of them, and I'm sure I am going to forget. Liar's Poker, everybody knows that one. Flash Boys, everybody knows that one too. Big Short, and I'm only naming the big ones that everybody has read. Many of you have also seen the films that have been made out of those books and have found those stories, which are quite complicated as the way in which they eventually happened, clear, obvious. And that is one of the many talents that our guest has. So, the game we're going to play is the following. I ask you questions, you ask me questions, and we both commit to answer honestly. Shall we?
Can we just do two truths and a lie instead? Sure.
Maybe we can save the lies for the last ones, okay? Can I start?
You go first.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, you've written extensively about the financial world. You yourself had a role in the financial sector, which is one of the reasons you took a particular interest in how good or bad it can be. It has produced devastating effects, particularly in 2008 and following, destroyed massive wealth. Do you think things have changed?
Well, that's a big question. Obviously, some things have changed. Can I back up just a little bit?
Yes, please.
First, let us just acknowledge how improbable it is I'm sitting up here on this stage with you. When I was telling Christine backstage that when I was coming out of the London School of Economics, I wandered into a job interview with the IMF, and there was a ruthless German there who took about 60 seconds to realize I had absolutely no business being there, and the next 30 minutes demonstrating that. And if you told that man, I wish I knew it, I hope he's here, that I would be sitting on stage with her, or actually that she would be sitting on stage at that point, would be the idea of a woman running the IMF, right? So things have changed. But
you're not looking for a job eventually?
Well, you never know. But I'd like to think that instead of a job, if you're looking to compensate me, just a little more material would be good. So when you ask me, have things changed?
Yeah.
I was aware when I was writing Liar's Poker that I was writing about a financial culture that was in transformation. And it was very clear then that there were some big things at work that were potentially corrosive. They were the decline of the partnership structure at the center of American finance, so transformation from partnerships to corporations, the rising complexity of financial instruments, which quickly came to function as a form of opacity, that all the dark wood panel came down, all the glass went up, it all seemed more transparent, but as it got more complicated, it didn't matter, it might as well have been dark wood panel. And the rise of the idea that these banks were essentially not service enterprises, but trading enterprises. To the point where, you know, the one I work for, Salomon Brothers, in 1990 and 91, the proprietary trading desk, which was just a dozen people, and a firm of 8,000 people, generated more than 100% of the firm's profits.
Oof.
So the rest of the firm is unprofitable. Everything is aimed at these trading books. Flash forward to the financial crisis. It's very clear that all three of these changes play a very big role going into 2008. I mean, the question that brings me back to the story, I didn't think I was ever going to write about Wall Street again, but I couldn't believe that it wasn't that I couldn't believe that the big Wall Street banks would do bad things to the rest of the world. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me is that they would commit suicide, and that there are attempts suicide. That if you look back away from our financial system, for 30 years plus, it's had call on the best and the brightest across the Western world, and the people it's attracting are not unself-interested people. And yet somehow, when they came together in these organizations, they tried to commit suicide. It was a disaster. How those banks became the dumb money was what got me back in. And it was very clear that there were lots of bad incentives at the heart of the thing that caused individuals in the banks to do things that were good for themselves but bad for the institution.
Right.
So when you ask, has it changed? I think have the forces that led to the crisis been in any way offset by regulation? Has the financial sector been kicked on some different course? I think, well, there have been some changes in compensation to try to make the relationship between the Wall Street employee and the employer look more like the relationships in the old partnership system. But it's not nearly enough. There's certainly not been a decline in the complexity of the instruments. I mean, the complexity of the instruments played a very big role. So that hasn't changed at all. And there has been some effort to reduce the importance of proprietary trading in the big institutions. But there's this whole other question. I hate to go on for too long, but
no, come on.
So it's a two-part question, because one is, have things changed in such a way that will reduce the likelihood that these banks these giant financial institutions will commit suicide and bring us all down with them? Well, yes, there's been some change there. Has it changed in such a way that they are less likely to do bad things to the rest of us? Much less so. But more importantly, in a weird way, more importantly, has the wider public been persuaded that the change has happened? And not at all. That what regulation has been implemented is so complicated and poorly described to the public that if you wander the streets and ask people what happened, what did they do about Wall Street, people would say basically nothing. The banks seem to be bigger. They're still doing poisonous things like this Wells Fargo scandal. I mean, there's not the toxic relationship between the financial sector and the rest of the society has not been addressed.
Not been cured.
Not been cured, and you see the political consequences. So I think it's still a big problem, but that's just me, and
it's just Wall Street, isn't it? Because if we look at the city, and I just want to recognize somebody who's sitting there, Minouche Shafik, who's been a member of the IMF and who's been instrumental in working on the regulations that apply in the UK. You know Minouche as well.
The Bank of England has made a much greater attempt to attack the culture of finance.
Right.
And that has to happen, I think. It may be, I don't know enough about what's actually happened in every other country.
Right.
The truth is, let us just accept the truth that I'm a bit of a fraud here. I mean, I write stories, I write books, and I move in for a story and then I move out, and I don't pay much attention afterwards. But I have paid attention to Wall Street. What do you think? Does anything I just say strike you as completely idiotic?
No.
All right. That's good.
No, I don't. First of all, I don't want to offend you right now because I don't want you to leave that podium for the moment. But I think a lot of what you said is right. There have been lots of other things that have taken place, which hopefully makes those systems more suicide resistant.
Yep.
And taxpayers less accountable for the mess that is eventually being created.
Yep.
So I think that's a plus. But they would themselves. the regulators and the supervisors would themselves admit that there is still work to be done. On the complexity of instruments, absolutely, and we're not there yet, not at all.
So one of the things I remember thinking as I was working on both The Big Short and what became Boomerang, the series I wrote about the European crisis,
Yeah.
especially in Iceland, was how much better off we probably all would have been if men had been removed from the top of every large financial institution and women had been put in their place. And there's actually, there's wonderful research that's been done about male overconfidence and its financial effects. There's an economist named Terry O'Dean, who
Yes.
boys will be boys. When you went into when I went into Iceland, that was, and I went when it was fresh, there was a real sense. I mean, you have this nation, this so-called nation of 300,000 people.
And banks.
And they all knew, and these 3 giant banks, and every Icelander knew this, that the men had screwed up the country. That the
And
men,
do you remember who fixed it?
a woman.
Yeah.
Not just a woman, a woman who was gay, a woman who would not even sleep with a man. But when I went in there, it was the men were so chastened. You could tell it was a moment. Every married man knows this moment where he has told his wife, "Yeah, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I know where I'm going. Don't. We're not going to stop for directions. Don't look at the map." And then all of a sudden, you're
lost.
You're dead. And it was because these men who'd been fishermen and who'd always known what they were doing got into this new thing called finance. And basically their wives thought, well, they knew what they were doing when they're fishing. Maybe they know what they're doing now. And the moment I walk in, the only viable financial advisory firm in Iceland was it was a new one, run by a woman. And its business pitch was, if you let me advise you in your financial affairs, I promise no man will participate, that it will be just females giving advice. And people were banging down their doors to get in. So you could see in microcosm what I think happened more generally. And I'm groping towards a question for you. And the question is this. I was struck as the financial crisis unspooled, how quickly and ruthlessly the system treated women who were near power. It was incredible how much blame landed on female desks when there were so few females in high positions. So Erin Callan and Sally Krawcheck and Zoe Cruz and the woman who was with the London Whale and JP Morgan. It was just, there was always a woman to blame.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, are you nervous? Because whenever I see a woman put in a position of prominence in finance, I think she's there for one reason, to take the fall if things go wrong. So I
tell you something, Michael, if I take the blame for anything for which I'm not responsible, I'll call on you to help me. I will.
So this
who,
thought has not crossed your mind. There we go. I think we've had a frank moment here.
Do you remember how many were whistleblowers as well? Most whistleblowers in the pre-financial crisis. You know, the big Enron and was it Enron? Aon.
Yeah.
Arthur Andersen. I mean,
Enron.
Enron. Thank you. The whistleblowers were all women.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh?
It is interesting.
So what I can tell you, though, is that things have not materially changed. In other words, when it's really messy, the women come in. They restore the situation to a place where it becomes a bit stable, a bit better, and then somehow the men come back.
Yeah.
We need to go to Iceland together.
Yeah, we
see
do
what
need
it's
to go
like.
to Iceland together. It's pretty great. Anyway, I would love to know from you, because I would love for you to explain to me why in 2016 there still are so few women in positions of great authority in the financial sector. What's the cause of that?
First of all, there are a few more. You know, the Fed now has a woman leading it.
again, cause for concern.
Well, she receives a lot more criticism, in my view, than many of her predecessors in many ways, given the great job that she's doing.
Right.
Jeanette, that's for you. But it's true. When I look around the G20 room, finance ministers, very few women. When I look around our IMFC, which is the large group of finance ministers and governors of central banks, very few women as well. And I really think that we all have to collectively, men and women, push in the direction that you have indicated, that women can actually bring a lot of value that is needed in the financial sector. It's okay if the trading is not as frequent and as rapid as the boys would like to have it.
Right.
Because if it brings a bit of stability and a bit of security to people at large and to that particular sector, which is vital and yet not exactly as it should be, it would be better. But it's not happening at the pace where it should.
I agree. I once.
But maybe you can help, because you are an incredible communicator. People who don't understand financial markets, people who don't get why the financial crisis started, people who don't understand what actually subprime means, you explained it all easily for the novice, for the layman, for the laywoman. Why can't you explain that women are better with a book, with a film, with something that really is just obvious?
It's funny you should ask that, because it's striking to me that there's been this hole in the market for these stories set in the financial sector. And the hole in the market exists because things aren't being explained clearly to ordinary people. When I set out to write, my ambition is always that my mother will want to read what I write and will understand it. And when you're faced with trying to explain to my mother a collateralized debt obligation, the task is daunting. Now, the funny thing about this ambition is I don't think my mother even reads my books, but I like to think that one day she might. But I have there are.
I bet you she would read it if you wrote the one that I'm
yes.
suggesting.
Well, so the story, I have my unslaked ambition is to create a television drama. And the first television drama idea I had, and it's still kicking around, and I'm about to go try to push it again, was about 3 women who start a hedge fund, and the premise of the hedge fund is exploiting the idiocy of men. And so that's all they're doing, is they're finding the mistakes that men make, and they're profiting from that. And that would enable me to get at the problem. Getting that on the air is hard. I thought I got close once, and I'm about to go try again. So there are ways to and the power of, even though what I do is probably slightly not respectable in the minds of the people who are in this room, in that I am crafting narratives out of pretty technical stuff and simplifying in places, and I have a feeling that half the room, if they would say, he did an okay job of explaining the collateralized debt obligation, but he missed this over here. I'm sure that I am not a finance specialist. I happen to have worked on Wall Street for a few years, and understood that that there are a lot of questions that always need to be asked. That you have to get underneath the jargon.
Yeah.
And when you get underneath the jargon, the stuff ceases to be all that complicated. But it is amazing the power of the narrative to affect the way people think about all of this.
So do you think we should apply those principles to us? Because we have stories to tell, and we have recommendations to make, and we have policies advised, but sometimes the message doesn't come across very well, and sometimes public opinions don't see that, number one, we've changed, number two, we might be advising for the better rather than for the worse.
It's funny, this is probably true of every arena of ambition, that it develops a language of its own, and if you're in the arena and you try to speak in some other language, you're discredited. That if you don't use the jargon
True.
you've been handed.
Very true.
So I have a privileged position because I'm not in the arena. I come in as an interloper, and I can speak about these things in looser terms. But if you tried to do it, they'd say you were an idiot. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
I think it happened to me several times,
Yes.
including in this institution.
Yes, I'm sure that. So
At the beginning.
So if you try to communicate with people who know nothing whatsoever about finance in a way they will understand, it would cost you with the people who you have to deal with every day. Whereas I don't have that, what you should do, instead of trying to be more like me in the way you communicate with others, you should just create more of me. You should let people in who can do it. And so building kind of trust with storytellers is a very good idea. And there are plenty of storytellers. I mean, why aren't there great, there are some, but podcasts, coming out of the IMF, done by people who don't work for the IMF, or why isn't there a great Wall Street TV show? There is this market inefficiency that I've made a career out of, right? I made a living out of selling millions of books to people who want to read about this sector, because nobody else is addressing them in a way that they are engaged by. So there are plenty of people who could do the job. They just need to be kind of invited to do the job, I think. I was an exception because I happened to work in the place for a little while, so I had a way in. But if you're, I don't know, Ira Glass at This American Life, or Malcolm Gladwell, or one of these people out there who are wonderful storytellers, if they were admitted into this realm, they'd work magic with public understanding. So that's if I were in your shoes, that's what I would do. I'd start calling up people who I recognize as gifted storytellers and say, this may seem too complicated for you to understand. It's not. Come and move in for 6 months and just see how it all works.
So when we advocate inclusive growth, when we push for trade and recognize that trade has had huge benefits and some downside to it, and already I'm in the jargon, because downside, what does it mean to people?
Right.
Right? I know. I've been contaminated, big way.
Well, but it's just, it's a shorthand. You're speaking to people in the room who know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, that's right.
So why?
So do you think that you could make a story out of that? I'm not suggesting to.
The stories that need to be told are the stories about inequality right now. There are two kinds of stories that seem to me to be wet, rich themes that need to be addressed and addressed very creatively. One is the inequality in the world, and two is trust, and the lack of trust. I tried to do this with this book I wrote, Flash Boys. I mean, what happens? I wrote a whole book and about the rigging of the American stock market, and in the most extraordinary financial things have been done. But what interested me was someone on Wall Street was trustworthy and was going to insist on being trustworthy and was going to insist on introducing trust as the main subject, and the effect that had on the environment around him, which is incredible because the whole system depends on trust, and we've kind of forgotten that. But that and this idea of your idea of inclusive growth, I think that's another way of saying how do you address the inequality in the world and make the problems it gives rise to real? Off the top of my head, do I have a way of addressing that? No. But
we can
sure,
think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Could be done. Could be done.
Okay.
Could
That's
be done.
reassuring for us.
It's interesting to me that you obviously feel some frustration with your ability to communicate.
Yeah.
Why? Where does that come from?
Well, I tell you the frustration we have is we have been repeating some messages lately about growth, about inclusiveness, about inequality. But I think that we could come across in a much louder, more efficient way. And we always ask ourselves, do we have the traction?
Right.
Because we deal with finance ministers, we deal with governors of central banks who themselves are hostage to their own government first, and public opinion, and the next election.
Right.
So we are, looking at who are the interlocutors, who will make the difference at the end of the day, which is why I think we need to tell that story beyond them as well, and outreach to public opinion and to explain, what the positive outcome, what the benefits there could be in doing this, that, or the other. Without losing sight that there are, finance ministers, governors of central banks are our natural interlocutors, and we work with them, and they implement the policies, and they design the new laws and all the rest of it. But I think that we have to go as well, in order to help them do their job, we have to go beyond that.
If you stand up and give a speech where you unload your heart on the world, when you say, this is where I see the problems in the world, and this is why we aren't addressing them properly. Do you get that? I've read some of your speeches, and you've done some of this. Are you surprised by the response or disappointed by the response? Do you feel like you're not listened to, and that you need to find another way to communicate? Or do you feel like there's just natural constraint in the job, and there's only so much you can do?
I think the loudspeaker is not big enough.
You don't have a big enough megaphone. That's there.
Now, I want to
Yeah.
suggest that you continue to help us, because I think you would be fantastic. As part of our series here, do you mind if I ask you 3 questions that I will ask everybody who attends this program?
Sure.
Okay. So I have to be guided
Sure,
by the
mind.
team here. If you had the choice today of being professionally somebody completely different, who would you be?
Steph Curry. He's the shooting guard for the Golden State Warriors. But other than, that would be the first thing. Really? But less realistically,
Yeah.
no. So I had. You go back in your life and you think, what paths might I have gone on? So I might have become an art historian if there was a big market for art historians. That would have been the first thing that happened. When that didn't happen, if I had absolutely no literary ability, I would be a financier. I would still be on Wall Street.
Really?
They were throwing huge sums of money at me. The people I told at Salomon Brothers that I was leaving to become a writer, they weren't worried I was going to write about what I was going to write about them. They were worried about my sanity. They thought you're walking out of basically a life of being a rich person to do that. But I probably would have despaired at my ability to do anything productive. And I've never been useful. And if you're not useful and you don't know very much, the only place you can really get rich is Wall Street. And so that's almost certainly what I would have ended up doing. And I just stayed there and felt guilty about it probably. So God knows where that would have led.
Well, I'm so glad you went.
So those are the only 2 realistic paths. And thank God that I've been able to do something other than that.
Okay, if you had a magic stick, who would you like most to meet, whom you haven't met?
Who I like most to meet who I haven't met. It's funny. I've now got to the point where I've met. There are not many people I haven't met. I will tell you if I had a magic wand, but a magic stick is a better way of putting it. If I had a magic stick, it makes me feel like Gandalf. So if I had a magic stick, and there's someone I've long wanted to write about, and I have not been able to get to, is Vladimir Putin. So there are no celebrities, and I've spent a lot of time with the president. So there's no one. People, he is proven inaccessible to me. I think he's a very dangerous character. I worry that he could really do bad things in the world, and I would love a chance to lighten him up a little bit. Just see. I would love to be able to spend some time with him, and I'd love to be able to write about him. That he represents something that's kind of that's alien to me, that feels like it might drag us back into a darker and earlier era of international affairs, and I want to understand that.
I was going to ask you who is the person you really never want to meet, but I guess you've already answered.
No. I want to meet. No, but Putin I would love to meet, because So who would I never want to meet? The Grim Reaper. That's who I don't want to meet. I don't have anybody like that. I suppose the answer would be a high-frequency trader in the court of law. When I wrote Flash Boys, I knew I was taking on a group of people who were very litigious and had huge sums of money at stake, and
we're ready for anything.
Ready for anything, and so I was a little. I was a little worried about that.
Well, it's been our fantastic pleasure to actually meet you, Michael, today. So thank you very much. I'm afraid this is over.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'll give you.